The scream that tore through the Wyoming wilderness in the summer of 1878 was sharp enough to send birds scattering from the pines. And Colt Ashford stopped dead in his tracks, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle slung across his broad back. He had been tracking elk through the mountainous terrain outside Shoshone City for 3 days now, his provisions running low, but his determination unwavering. The mountain man stood well over 6 feet tall, his muscular frame honed by years of survival in the unforgiving wilderness, his dark hair falling past his shoulders and his beard neatly trimmed despite his isolation. The cry came again, this time weaker, more desperate, and Colt changed direction immediately, his powerful legs carrying him swiftly through the dense forest toward the source of the distress. The storm that had rolled through the previous night had been vicious, bringing wind strong enough to bend the tallest trees and rain that turned the earth to mud. Colt had weathered it in a small cave he knew well, listening to the fury of nature with the calm acceptance of a man who understood his place in the wild. Now, as he pushed through the undergrowth, he could see the destruction the storm had wrought. Branches littered the ground, and several smaller trees had been completely uprooted, their root systems exposed like gnarled fingers reaching toward the sky. When he finally located the source of the screaming, his breath caught in his chest. A young woman lay trapped beneath a massive fallen pine, its weight pressing down on her lower body. She had stopped screaming now, her face pale and streaked with dirt and tears, her chest heaving with labored breaths. Her dark auburn hair had come loose from its pins and spread around her head like a halo, and even in her current state of distress, Colt could see she was beautiful. Her dress, once fine fabric suitable for a lady of means, was torn and muddy, and one of her hands clutched at the bark of the tree as though she might somehow lift it herself. "Hold on," Colt called out, his voice rough from days of silence. "Do not move. I am going to get you out of there." The woman's eyes, a striking shade of green that reminded him of new spring leaves, locked onto his face with desperate hope. "Please," she gasped. "I cannot feel my legs. I have been here since last night." Colt quickly assessed the situation, his mind working through the problem with the methodical efficiency of someone accustomed to solving life or death challenges. The tree was too heavy to lift alone, but if he could clear away some of the smaller branches and debris, he might be able to create enough leverage to free her. He dropped his pack and rifle, then pulled the axe from his belt, the blade gleaming in the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy above. "What is your name?" he asked as he began hacking at the branches, needing to keep her talking to keep her conscious. "Katherine," she managed, her voice strained. "Katherine Green. I was traveling with my uncle's wagon train, but my horse spooked during the storm and threw me. I ran into the forest to try to catch him, and then the wind, the tree, I did not even hear it falling until it was too late." "My name is Colt Ashford," he said, his powerful arms swinging the axe with precise, controlled strikes. Wood chips flew with each impact, and sweat began to bead on his forehead despite the cool mountain air. "You are going to be fine, Katherine. I promise you that." He worked with focused intensity, clearing away the smaller branches that pinned her upper body first, giving her more room to breathe. Her breathing eased slightly, but he could see the pain in her eyes, the way she bit her lower lip to keep from crying out. The main trunk still pressed heavily across her thighs, and he knew he had to work quickly. If her legs were badly injured, time was critical. Colt found a sturdy branch nearby, one that had fallen but remained intact, thick enough to serve as a lever. He wedged it beneath the trunk at an angle, using a large rock as a fulcrum. His muscles bulged beneath his buckskin shirt as he threw his full weight against the makeshift lever, the veins in his forearms standing out with the effort. The tree groaned and shifted slightly, but not enough. "When I lift this," he said, breathing hard, "you need to pull yourself out as fast as you can. Can you do that?" Katherine nodded, her jaw set with determination despite her obvious fear. "I will try." Colt repositioned the lever, finding a better angle, then braced his boots against the ground. He pulled in a deep breath and threw every ounce of his considerable strength into the effort. His back strained, his shoulders burned, and for a moment he thought it would not be enough. Then, with a loud crack, the leverage point found purchase and the tree lifted several inches. "Now!" he shouted. Katherine scrambled backward, using her arms to drag herself free, and Colt held the weight for 3 more agonizing seconds before releasing the lever and letting the tree crash back down. He was at her side in an instant, his large hands carefully examining her legs through the torn fabric of her dress. "Can you feel this?" he asked, pressing gently against her shin. "Yes," she gasped, wincing. "It hurts, but I can feel it." Relief flooded through him. "Good, that is very good. Your left leg is definitely broken, but you are going to survive this." He looked up at her face, meeting those remarkable green eyes. "I need to get you to safety, to shelter where I can properly set that bone and get you warm and fed. This is going to hurt." Before she could respond, Colt slid one muscular arm beneath her shoulders and the other under her knees, lifting her as though she weighed nothing at all. Katherine cried out at the movement, her body rigid with pain, and he felt her fingers clutch at his shirt. "I am sorry," he said softly. "But we have to move." "Your wagon train, where were they headed?" "Shoshone City," Katherine said through gritted teeth. "We were bringing supplies for the winter. My uncle, Thomas Green, he will be looking for me." "I know Thomas," Colt said, already moving through the forest with long, purposeful strides, carefully avoiding obstacles while keeping her as steady as possible. "Good man. We will get word to him, but first we need to take care of you. My cabin is about 2 miles from here." "Can you hold on that long?" "I do not have much choice," she said, and despite her pain, there was a hint of dry humor in her voice that made him smile. The journey back to his cabin was arduous. Colt's arms never wavered despite the distance and the challenging terrain, his powerful legs carrying them both over fallen logs, across a shallow creek, and up a steep incline. Katherine drifted in and out of consciousness, her head sometimes resting against his broad chest, and during those moments when she was aware, she found herself studying his face. He had a strong jaw, weathered by sun and wind, and his eyes were a deep brown that seemed to hold both kindness and fierce determination. She had never seen a man quite like him, so completely at home in this wild place, so utterly confident in his ability to protect and provide. When they finally reached his cabin, tucked into a small clearing with a stream running nearby, Katherine stirred fully awake. The structure was solid, built from logs he had clearly hewn himself, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Smoke curled from the chimney, suggesting he had left a fire burning before his hunting trip. Colt kicked the door open and carried her inside, laying her carefully on his bed, the only bed in the single-room dwelling. The interior was sparse but clean, with pelts hanging on the walls, dried herbs hanging from the rafters, and a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs near the stone fireplace. His few possessions were neatly organized, everything in its place. "I am going to cut away your dress," he said, pulling a knife from his belt. "I need to see how bad the break is." Katherine nodded, too exhausted and in too much pain to feel embarrassed. She watched as he carefully slit the fabric of her skirt and petticoat, exposing her left leg. The skin was already deeply bruised, swelling rapidly, and she could see the unnatural angle of her shin bone. She looked away quickly, feeling nauseous. Colt worked with surprising gentleness for a man of his size and strength. He had set broken bones before, both his own and those of injured animals he had found in his traps. His hands were steady as he carefully felt along her leg, determining the exact location of the break. "This is going to be the worst part," he warned her. "I have some whiskey. It will help with the pain." He retrieved a bottle from a shelf and helped her sit up enough to take several long swallows. The liquid burned down her throat, making her cough, but warmth spread through her chest and the edges of her pain began to soften slightly. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, and he placed a thick leather strap between her teeth. "Bite down on this." What followed was agony unlike anything Katherine had ever experienced. Colt pulled her leg straight with firm, controlled pressure, and she heard the bone grind back into place even through her own muffled screaming. Tears streamed down her face, and her fingers dug into the furs beneath her, but Colt never hesitated, never wavered. He worked quickly, splinting her leg with 2 straight branches padded with soft cloth, then binding it tightly with strips of leather. When it was finally over, Katherine spat out the leather strap and lay back gasping, her entire body trembling. Colt dampened a cloth in cool water from a pitcher and gently wiped her face, his touch surprisingly tender. "The worst is over," he said softly. "You did well, very brave." "I do not feel brave," she whispered. "I feel like I want to die." "You are not going to die. I will not allow it." There was such conviction in his voice that despite everything, she believed him. Over the next several hours, Colt tended to her with unwavering attention. He made her a broth from dried meat and vegetables, feeding it to her spoonful by spoonful when her hands shook too much to hold the bowl herself. He covered her with warm furs when she began to shiver, piling them high until the trembling subsided. He checked her splint repeatedly, making small adjustments to ensure it remained secure. And he talked to her, his deep voice a constant, soothing presence that kept the fear at bay. "Tell me about yourself," Katherine said when the pain had dulled to a manageable throb, and her mind was clear enough to be curious. "How does a man end up living alone in these mountains?" Colt settled into the chair he had pulled beside the bed, his long legs stretched out before him. "I came west after the war, fought for the Union, saw things no man should see. When it was over, I could not go back to the life I had known before. The mountains called to me, offered peace and solitude. I have been here 5 years now, trapping and hunting, living on my own terms." "Do you never get lonely?" He was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "Sometimes. But loneliness is better than being surrounded by people and feeling empty inside. Out here, life is simple, honest. You succeed or fail based on your own choices and abilities. No pretense, no lies." Katherine studied his face, seeing the shadows that lingered in his eyes despite his words. "That sounds like a very solitary existence." "It has been," he admitted. "Until today." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a connection that was unexpected and profound. Katherine felt her breath catch, and she looked away first, suddenly aware of how improper this situation was. She was alone in a cabin with a man she had only just met, wearing nothing but her torn undergarments beneath the pile of furs, completely dependent on his care and protection. As if reading her thoughts, Colt stood and moved to the fireplace. "You should rest now. You have been through an ordeal and your body needs time to heal. I will sleep outside on the porch. You will be safe here, Katherine. You have my word on that. But it is your home, your bed. I cannot ask you to give that up. You did not ask, I offered." He turned to look at her, and the protective intensity in his gaze made her heart flutter strangely. "Sleep now. We will figure out everything else tomorrow." Despite her certainty that sleep would be impossible, Katherine found her eyes growing heavy almost immediately. The whiskey, the exhaustion, and the sense of safety she felt in Colt's presence combined to pull her under, and within minutes she was deeply asleep. Colt stood watching her for a long moment, this unexpected woman who had stumbled into his carefully ordered life. Her face was peaceful now in sleep, the pain lines smoothed away, and he was struck again by her beauty. But it was more than that. In the brief hours since he had found her, he had seen her courage, her determination, and her refusal to give in to despair even in the worst moments. Those qualities called to something deep inside him, something he had thought was buried forever. He stepped outside into the cool evening air, breathing deeply. The stars were beginning to emerge, brilliant points of light scattered across the darkening sky, and the forest was alive with the sounds of night creatures. This was his world, his sanctuary, and he had grown accustomed to the solitude. But now, with Katherine sleeping inside his cabin, he felt something shift inside his chest, something that was equal parts exhilarating and terrifying. The next morning dawned clear and bright, and Colt was up with the sun. He had slept fitfully on the porch, his mind too active to find deep rest. Now he built up the fire and set about making a proper breakfast, frying salt pork and corn cakes in his iron skillet. The smell of cooking food eventually roused Katherine, and he heard her stirring inside. "Good morning," he called. "How do you feel?" "Like a tree fell on me," she responded, and he smiled at her tone. The spirit was still there, which was a good sign. He brought her a plate of food and helped prop her up with rolled furs so she could eat more easily. Her color was better today, though he could see the pain in her eyes when she moved. "I need to ride into Shoshone City," Colt said. "Your uncle will be frantic with worry, and you need a proper doctor to check that leg. It is about a 3-hour ride, so I should be back before mid-afternoon. Will you be all right alone for that long?" Katherine felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of him leaving, but she pushed it down. "I will be fine, but please hurry back." "I will." He paused, then added, "There is a rifle leaning against the wall by the door, already loaded. If anyone comes while I am gone, anyone at all, you shoot first and ask questions later." "Understood," she nodded, touched by his concern. "I understand." Before he left, Colt made sure she had everything she might need within reach. Water, more food, an extra blanket, even a chamber pot since she could not walk. His attention to detail and his consideration for her comfort made her chest feel tight with an emotion she could not quite name. Then he was gone, and the cabin seemed suddenly too quiet. Katherine spent the morning drifting between sleep and wakefulness, her body demanding rest as it worked to heal. When she was awake, her thoughts kept returning to Colt. She had known him for less than a day, yet he had shown her more genuine care and concern than most people she had known her entire life. There was something about him, something solid and real, that called to her in ways she had never experienced. True to his word, Colt returned in the early afternoon, but he was not alone. Riding beside him was Thomas Green, Katherine's uncle, a portly man in his 50s with a weathered face and kind eyes. Behind them came another rider, a thin man with spectacles whom Colt introduced as Dr. Harrison Wells. "Katherine." Thomas rushed to her bedside, his face creased with worry. "Thank God you are alive. We searched all night and through the morning. I feared the worst." "I am all right, Uncle," she assured him, squeezing his hand. "Mr. Ashford saved my life." Thomas turned to Colt, who stood near the door, and gripped his hand firmly. "I am forever in your debt. If there is ever anything you need, anything at all, you have only to ask." Colt nodded but said nothing, his attention on Dr. Wells as the man examined Katherine's leg. The doctor was thorough, removing the splint and checking Colt's work with careful precision. "Whoever set this bone did an excellent job," Wells said, looking up at Colt with newfound respect. "The break is clean, properly aligned, and already beginning to heal. With rest and care, she should make a full recovery, though she will need to stay off this leg for at least 6 weeks. 6 weeks, Katherine exclaimed. But the wagon train, we are supposed to reach Shoshone City and then continue on to my father's ranch in Montana before winter. Thomas looked uncomfortable. Katherine, I cannot delay the wagon train for that long. We have schedules to keep, supplies that people are counting on. And the weather, we need to reach our destinations before the first snows. Then I will stay behind, Katherine said, though her voice wavered slightly. Surely there is someone in Shoshone City who could care for me until I am well enough to travel. The boarding house is full up, Dr. Wells said regretfully. The town is bursting at the seams with miners and railroad workers. Finding appropriate lodging for a young lady would be difficult, and finding someone with time to provide the level of care you will need would be nearly impossible. Colt had been listening quietly, his arms crossed over his broad chest, but now he spoke. "She can stay here." All eyes turned to him. "That would not be proper," Thomas said immediately. "Katherine is an unmarried woman and you are a bachelor. The arrangement would be scandalous." "The arrangement would keep her alive and properly cared for," Colt countered. "I have experience with healing injuries. I can hunt and provide food, and she will be safe here, safer than in a boarding house full of rough men far from home and their manners." He looked directly at Katherine. "But the choice is yours. I will not force you to stay if you are uncomfortable with the idea." Katherine felt her heart racing. 6 weeks alone with Colt Ashford in this remote cabin. It was improper, possibly even ruinous to her reputation. But when she looked at his face, at the steady strength she saw there, she felt no fear, only a strange excitement that she could not quite explain. "I will stay," she said firmly. "If Mr. Ashford is willing to tolerate my presence for that long, I will stay." Thomas sputtered protests, but Katherine cut him off. "Uncle, I am 22 years old, not a child. This is my decision to make, and I have made it. Please respect that." The older man looked between them, clearly troubled, but finally nodded. "Very well." "But Colt, I hold you to the highest standard here. She is my niece, and I trust you to treat her with complete respect and propriety." "You have my word," Colt said solemnly. Before they left, Thomas brought in supplies from the wagon train. Extra food, a trunk of Katherine's clothes and personal items, books to help pass the time, and even a bottle of laudanum from Dr. Wells to help manage her pain. The doctor gave Colt detailed instructions for her care, which he listened to with complete attention, asking questions and making notes in his mind. And then they were gone, and Katherine and Colt were alone again. The first few days passed in careful awkwardness. They were two strangers thrust into unusual intimacy by circumstance, each trying to navigate the situation with propriety and respect. Colt continued to sleep on the porch despite the cooling nights, refusing to take back his bed. He hunted and cooked, tended to her leg, and helped her with the more intimate necessities of her recovery with a matter-of-fact gentleness that somehow made it less embarrassing. Katherine, for her part, tried to be as little trouble as possible. She read the books Thomas had brought, practiced needlework when her hands were steady enough, and slowly began to regain her strength. But more than anything, she found herself watching Colt, watching the way he moved with unconscious grace despite his size, watching the way he skinned and dressed the game he brought back, his large hands working with surprising delicacy, watching the way firelight played across his features in the evening, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the depths of his dark eyes. They talked during those long days and evenings. At first, the conversations were superficial and safe, discussing the weather, the state of her healing, inconsequential matters. But gradually, as comfort grew between them, they began to share more personal things. Katherine told him about growing up in Philadelphia, the daughter of a wealthy merchant who had moved west to start a cattle ranch in Montana. She spoke of her mother's death when she was young, her father's distant affection, and her uncle's kindness in inviting her west to see if she might find a new life away from the rigid constraints of Eastern society. "I felt suffocated there," she confessed one evening as they sat by the fire, she in the bed and he in his chair nearby. "Every moment of my life was prescribed, every action judged. I was supposed to marry well, manage a household, bear children, and never have a single original thought. I wanted more than that. I wanted to feel alive." "And do you?" Colt asked. "Feel alive, I mean, now that you are out here," she laughed softly. "Being crushed by a tree certainly made me feel alive, though perhaps not in the way I intended. But yes, even laid up as I am, I feel more myself here than I ever did back east. There is something about this place, this wild, honest place, that calls to me." Colt found himself telling her things he had never spoken aloud to anyone. About the war, about the friends he had lost, about the nightmares that had driven him into the mountains, about the peace he had found in solitude, but also the emptiness that sometimes threatened to swallow him whole. "I lost my faith in humanity during those years," he said quietly. "Saw what men could do to each other in the name of causes and principles. It sickened me, made me question everything I thought I knew about the world. Out here, alone, I did not have to face those questions. I could just be." "But is just being enough?" Katherine asked softly. "Is survival the same as living?" Her words struck something deep inside him, and he had no answer. As the days turned into weeks, something shifted between them. What had been polite courtesy became genuine friendship. What had been awkward silence became comfortable quiet. They began to laugh together, to tease each other gently. Colt found himself looking forward to returning from his daily tasks just to see her smile. Katherine found herself listening for his footsteps, her heart lifting when she heard him approaching. One evening, about 3 weeks into her stay, Colt came in from checking his trap lines to find Katherine sitting up on the edge of the bed, her injured leg carefully extended. She had managed to dress herself in a simple day dress from her trunk and had brushed out her long auburn hair, leaving it loose around her shoulders. "You look better," he said, setting down his pack. "How does the leg feel? Stronger every day?" "I think I might try standing soon, with your help, of course. Dr. Wells said 6 weeks before you put weight on it." "Dr. Wells is not the one lying in bed day after day going slowly mad from inactivity," she retorted, but there was humor in her tone. Colt smiled and moved to the fire to start preparing their dinner. Katherine watched him work, finding herself mesmerized by the play of muscles beneath his shirt as he moved. Over the past weeks, she had come to appreciate not just his strength but the careful way he used it, never careless, always controlled. "Colt," she said suddenly, "would you teach me to shoot?" He turned to look at her in surprise. "Shoot?" "Yes, you said there is a rifle by the door. I should know how to use it properly, should I not? If I am going to live out here in this wild place, I should know how to defend myself." "You are not going to be living here," he said, but his voice sounded uncertain. "Once you are healed, you will join your father in Montana." "Perhaps," she said. "But either way, I want to learn. Will you teach me?" He studied her face for a long moment, seeing the determination there, and finally nodded. "Once you can walk, I will teach you, but not before then. Deal, deal." 2 weeks later, Katherine took her first tentative steps with Colt's strong arm supporting her. Her leg was weak and the bone still tender, but she could bear weight on it without collapsing. She felt triumphant, giddy with the small victory, and Colt's grin matched her own. "Slowly," he cautioned as she tried to take another step. "You do not want to rush this and undo all the healing." But Katherine was not interested in going slowly. After weeks of being bedridden, the freedom of movement, even limited movement, was intoxicating. She took another step, and another, and would have fallen if Colt had not caught her easily in his powerful arms. They froze like that, her hands pressed against his chest, his arms encircling her waist. Their faces were suddenly very close, and Katherine could feel the warmth of his breath on her cheek. The air between them seemed to crackle with tension, and her heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could feel it. "Katherine," he said, his voice rough. We should not." "Should not what?" she whispered, her eyes searching his face. "This." But even as he said it, one of his large hands came up to cup her cheek, his thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw. Katherine leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed. "Colt," she breathed. He pulled back suddenly, helping her back to sit on the bed, and then he was striding toward the door. "I need to check the horses," he said abruptly, and then he was gone, leaving Katherine sitting alone with her racing heart and trembling hands. That night, Colt did not return until very late, long after Katherine had fallen asleep. He stood in the doorway, watching her sleep in the dim glow of the banked fire, and felt his chest constrict with an emotion he had thought himself incapable of feeling. Somewhere over the past 5 weeks, this brave, beautiful woman had worked her way past every defense he had built, had found the heart he thought the war had destroyed, and had claimed it completely. But what could he offer her? A rough cabin in the wilderness, a life of hardship and isolation, none of the comforts and security she deserved. She came from wealth, from a world of civilization and refinement. What could she possibly want with a man like him? The next morning they were both careful and polite, neither mentioning the moment they had shared. But the awareness was there, simmering beneath every glance, every accidental touch. The air between them felt charged, expectant. True to his word, Colt began teaching Katherine to shoot. He started with the basics, showing her how to hold the rifle, how to sight down the barrel, how to squeeze the trigger rather than pull. She was a quick learner, eager and focused, and he found himself impressed by her natural aptitude. "You have a steady hand," he said, standing behind her as she aimed at a target he had set up near the cabin. "And you do not flinch. That is good." "I am not afraid of the noise," she said. "Should I be?" "No, fear leads to mistakes." His hands covered hers, adjusting her grip slightly. "Like this. Let the rifle become an extension of yourself." Katherine was barely breathing, hyper-aware of his presence behind her, his broad chest nearly touching her back, his arms bracketing hers. She could smell him, pine and leather and something uniquely masculine, and it made her head swim. "Now," he said softly, his breath stirring her hair. "Fire." She squeezed the trigger and the rifle barked, kicking back against her shoulder. The target, a piece of wood with a circle drawn on it, remained stubbornly unmarked. "Again," Colt said. They practiced until her shoulder was sore and the sun was sinking toward the mountains. By the end, she had managed to hit the target 3 times, and her grin was bright with accomplishment. "I did it," she exclaimed, turning to face him. "Did you see? I actually hit it." Colt found himself grinning back at her enthusiasm. "You did well. Natural talent, like I said." They were standing very close again, and this time neither of them pulled away. Katherine's smile faded as she looked up at him, her green eyes darkening with an emotion that made his heart stutter. "Colt," she said softly, "I do not want to leave." "Katherine," he began, but she cut him off. "Let me finish. Please. I know this is improper. I know I am probably being a foolish woman who has confused gratitude with something deeper, but I do not think I am confused." These past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. I feel more myself here with you than I have ever felt anywhere, and I hope, that maybe you feel something similar." Colt closed his eyes, warring with himself. Every logical part of his mind told him to let her go, to not burden her with his damaged soul and rough life. But his heart, that traitorous organ he had thought long dead, was screaming at him to hold on to her with both hands and never let go. "I feel much more than something similar," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "From the moment I found you in those woods, something changed inside me. You brought light into a darkness I did not even realize I was living in. But Katherine, you deserve more than I can give you. A proper home, security, a man who has not seen and done the things I have." "I do not want a proper home," Katherine said fiercely. "I want a real home, and I do not want a man who has never known darkness. I want a man who has faced it and survived it. I want you, Colt Ashford, only you." He made a sound that was part laugh, part sob, and then his arms were around her, and his mouth was on hers. The kiss was everything Katherine had imagined and more, fierce and tender, and filled with weeks of suppressed longing. His large hands cradled her face as though she were something precious and fragile, even as his lips claimed hers with passionate intensity. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Colt rested his forehead against hers. "Are you certain?" he asked. "Life with me will not be easy." "This is who I am, Katherine, a mountain man who lives simply and far from civilization. I cannot change that." "I am not asking you to change," she said, her hands gripping his shirt. "I am asking you to let me stay, to build a life here with you. I am stronger than I look, Colt. I can learn to live this way. I want to learn." "You are certain?" he asked again, needing to be absolutely sure. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring the taste and feel of her. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with an emotion she now recognized as love. "Then you will stay," he said. "But we will do this properly. I will ride to Shoshone City tomorrow and arrange for a preacher to come out. We will marry before God and the law, Katherine. I will not have your reputation damaged any more than it already has been by this situation." "I do not care about my reputation," she laughed. "But I do. You will be my wife, and you will be respected as such." The wedding took place 1 week later, on a bright September morning, with Thomas Green standing as witness along with Dr. Wells and a handful of others from town who had made the journey out to Colt's cabin. The preacher, a Methodist circuit rider named Reverend Samuel Cooper, performed the ceremony on the porch of the cabin, with the mountains rising majestic in the background. Katherine wore a simple dress of cream-colored cotton, her hair braided with wildflowers that Colt had picked for her that morning. Colt had trimmed his beard and hair, scrubbed himself clean, and wore his best buckskin shirt and dark trousers. He looked handsome and nervous, his large hands fidgeting until Katherine took them in hers and squeezed reassuringly. When Reverend Cooper pronounced them man and wife, Colt kissed her softly, reverently, and Katherine felt tears slip down her cheeks. Not tears of sadness, but of pure joy. Against all odds, in the most unlikely of circumstances, she had found where she belonged. The small group celebrated with a meal that the townspeople had brought, and Thomas pulled his niece aside for a private word. "Are you truly happy?" he asked, his weathered face creased with concern. "This is such a different life than what you were raised for." "I am happier than I ever thought possible," Katherine said honestly. "Colt is a good man, Uncle Thomas. He will care for me, protect me, love me. What more could I want?" Thomas embraced her, his eyes damp. "Your father asked me to look after you, to make sure you were safe. I hope I have done that." "You have. You brought me west, which led me to Colt. I could not be more grateful. After the guests departed, Colt and Katherine were finally alone as husband and wife. There was a shyness between them now, a new awareness of what the night would bring. Colt banked the fire and blew out most of the candles, leaving just enough light to see by. "I will be gentle," he promised, taking her hands in his. "I know you are inexperienced." "I trust you," Katherine said simply, and the words seemed to ease something in his expression. What followed was tender and beautiful, Colt introducing her to physical love with patience and care. His large hands, so capable of violence when necessary, touched her with exquisite gentleness. He worshipped her body with his own, showing her pleasures she had never imagined. And when they finally came together as one, Katherine cried out not in pain, but in wonder at the completeness she felt. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed that was now theirs, and Colt held her close against his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "I love you," he said into her hair. "I should have said it before now, but I love you, Katherine Ashford." "I love you too," she whispered back. "I think I started loving you the moment you told me you would not allow me to die. You sounded so absolutely certain, so determined, and I believed you completely." He chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "I was certain. The thought of losing you, of not having the chance to know you, was unbearable even then." They talked late into the night, making plans for their future. Colt explained the rhythms of mountain life, the preparations that needed to be made before winter, the skills Katherine would need to learn. She listened eagerly, asking questions, already planning how she would contribute to their household. "I can sew and mend," she said. "And I know basic cooking, though I imagine preparing game is different from the cooking I learned in Philadelphia. You will have to teach me." "I will teach you everything," he promised, "and you will teach me things as well." "What could I possibly teach you? You already have," he said seriously. "You have taught me that I am capable of feeling again, of connecting with another person. You have taught me that life is about more than just survival. Those are lessons I desperately needed." The first months of their marriage were a time of adjustment and learning. Katherine had been honest about her strength and determination, but even she had underestimated how different life in the mountains would be from anything she had known. The work was constant and physically demanding. She learned to dress game, to cure meat, to tan hides. She learned to bake bread in the cabin's small oven, and to make stews from whatever Colt brought back from his hunts. Her hands, once soft and carefully tended, became rough and calloused. Her body grew stronger, leaner, shaped by the demands of mountain living. There were days when she was exhausted, when she fell into bed at night too tired to speak. But there were also moments of such profound contentment that she could hardly believe this was her life, waking up beside Colt each morning, feeling his arms tighten around her before he woke. Working side by side with him to prepare for winter, their movements becoming synchronized as they learned each other's rhythms. Sitting together in the evenings, her mending in her lap and him carving by the firelight, not needing to fill the silence with words. Winter came early and hard that year. By November, snow had already begun to accumulate, and by December they were snowed in for weeks at a time. But the cabin was warm and well stocked, and Katherine found that she did not mind the isolation at all. In fact, she treasured it. The outside world fell away, and their universe contracted to just the two of them and the small, sturdy cabin that protected them from the elements. It was during one of those long winter nights, with the wind howling outside and the fire crackling inside, that Katherine realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but now she was certain. Her monthly courses had stopped, and she had been feeling queasy in the mornings. She was nervous about telling Colt, unsure how he would react to the news. But when she finally gathered her courage one evening after dinner, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. His face lit up with such pure joy that it took her breath away. "A baby," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," she laughed, tears streaming down her face. "In the spring, I think. Are you happy?" Instead of answering, he pulled her into his arms and held her tightly, his face buried in her hair. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were damp. "I never thought I would have this," he said roughly. "A wife, a family, a real home. I thought that part of life was not meant for me, but you gave me all of it, Katherine. You gave me everything." "We gave it to each other," she corrected, cupping his face in her hands. "And now we are going to give life to someone new, our son or daughter." Colt became even more protective than usual during Katherine's pregnancy. He insisted on doing all the heavy work, would not let her lift anything that he deemed too heavy, and worried constantly about her health. Katherine found it both endearing and occasionally frustrating, but she understood that it came from a place of love. "I am not made of glass," she said one day when he tried to prevent her from carrying water from the stream. "Women have babies all the time, Colt. I am perfectly capable of doing my work." "I know," he said, "but humor me. The thought of anything happening to you or the baby, it terrifies me." She softened at that, seeing the genuine fear in his eyes. "Nothing is going to happen to either of us. You will make sure of that, just like you made sure a falling tree would not be the end of me." As winter gave way to spring, Katherine's belly swelled with their child. She felt it moving inside her, small flutters at first and then strong kicks that made Colt's face light up with wonder when he felt them. They prepared the cabin as best they could, setting aside a corner for a cradle that Colt built with meticulous care, carving small animals into the wood. Katherine sewed tiny clothes from soft fabric, her hands moving with practiced ease despite the strangeness of making garments so small. She made blankets and diapers, and Colt fashioned toys from scraps of wood and leather. In early May, as the snow melted and the meadows burst into bloom with wildflowers, Katherine went into labor. They had planned for this, and Colt rode hard to Shoshone City to fetch Dr. Wells and the midwife, a capable woman named Margaret Foster. But babies come on their own schedule, and by the time they arrived, Katherine's labor was well advanced. Colt held her hand through the worst of it, his face pale but his presence steady and strong. He wiped her forehead with cool cloths, encouraged her, told her how brave she was, how much he loved her. And when the baby finally came, slipping into the world with a loud, healthy cry, he cut the cord with shaking hands. "A boy," Margaret announced, wrapping the baby in a clean blanket and placing him in Katherine's arms. "Strong and healthy." Katherine looked down at her son, at his tiny face scrunched up and red from crying, and felt a love so fierce it almost frightened her. Colt leaned over them both, his finger gently stroking the baby's cheek, and she saw tears streaming down his weathered face. "He is perfect," Colt whispered. "Katherine, he is perfect." "What should we call him?" she asked. They had discussed names during the long winter months, going back and forth on various options. But now, looking at their son, only one name felt right. "Connor," Colt said. "Connor Thomas Ashford, after your uncle who brought us together." "Connor," Katherine repeated, trying out the name. "Yes. That is perfect." Dr. Wells and Margaret stayed for 2 days to ensure both mother and baby were healthy and strong. Margaret taught Katherine how to nurse the baby, how to swaddle him properly, all the small practical things that new mothers need to know. And then they were gone, and the new little family was alone again. Those first weeks were exhausting and overwhelming in ways Katherine had not anticipated. Connor was a hungry baby who woke frequently through the night, and she quickly learned to function on broken sleep. But Colt was there, always there, taking the baby when he could to let Katherine rest, pacing the cabin floor with Connor against his broad chest, singing rough lullabies in his deep voice. Watching Colt with their son made Katherine fall in love with him all over again. This fierce, strong man who had lived alone in the wilderness for years was so tender with the tiny baby, so gentle and patient. He changed dirty diapers without complaint, bathed Connor with careful hands, and spent hours just holding him, marveling at every small movement and sound. As summer arrived and Connor grew, their life settled into a new rhythm. Katherine had worried that motherhood would mean giving up the independence she had found in the mountains, but instead, she found ways to incorporate Connor into her daily activities. She fashioned a sling from soft leather that allowed her to carry him against her chest while she worked, his small body warm and secure. Colt built a small pen near the cabin where Connor could play safely while they worked on tasks nearby. And as the boy grew older and more aware, he began to show signs of his parents' spirits. He was curious and brave, quick to smile, and utterly fearless in his explorations. The years passed in a blur of seasons and growth. Connor was joined by a sister, Emma, when he was 2 years old, and then another brother, Henry, 2 years after that. The cabin that had once seemed spacious for two now bulged with the happy chaos of 5. Colt expanded the cabin, adding another room for the children, and built a larger barn for the animals they had acquired. What had started as a solitary trapper's camp had grown into a thriving homestead. Katherine planted a garden, coaxing vegetables from the mountain soil, and Colt built pens for chickens and a few pigs. They were not wealthy by any measure, but they were rich in ways that mattered. Rich in love, in laughter, in the deep satisfaction of a life built by their own hands. The children grew strong and capable, learning from their parents the skills they would need to thrive in this wild place. Connor became his father's shadow, following Colt into the woods to learn tracking and hunting. Emma showed her mother's determination and Katherine's gift for shooting, able to hit a target with impressive accuracy by the time she was 8. Henry was still small, but already showing signs of being the scholar of the family, more interested in the books that Katherine had carefully preserved than in outdoor pursuits. They were not entirely isolated. Thomas Green visited when he could, bringing news from the larger world and gifts for the children. The people of Shoshone City came to know and respect the Ashford family, and Colt occasionally took his furs to trade there, now always accompanied by one or more of his children. Katherine maintained correspondence with her father in Montana, though they had never reconciled over her choice to marry a mountain man instead of someone from her own social class. But she had made her peace with that. This life she had built with Colt was worth more than her father's approval. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple, Connor and Emma playing in the yard while Henry napped inside, Katherine leaned her head against Colt's shoulder. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "The life you had before, the solitude and peace. We took that from you, the children and I." Colt turned to look at her, his dark eyes warm. "You did not take anything from me, Katherine. You gave me everything. That man who lived alone in these mountains, he was not at peace. He was hiding. You taught me the difference between peace and emptiness. You filled my life with purpose and love and joy. I regret nothing except all the years I lived before I found you." She smiled, her heart full. "I feel the same. Everything I thought I wanted back in Philadelphia, all those dreams of adventure and excitement, they were nothing compared to the reality of this life. I am exactly where I am supposed to be." He kissed the top of her head, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "We both are." As the children grew older, they began to hear the story of how their parents met. It became a favorite tale, requested again and again, especially on cold winter nights when the family gathered around the fire. "Tell us how you saved Mama," Emma would beg, curled up in Katherine's lap despite being almost too big for it. And Colt would begin the story, his deep voice weaving the tale. He always told it faithfully, never embellishing or exaggerating. The storm, the fallen tree, Katherine's courage as he set her broken leg, the long weeks of recovery that turned into something much more profound. "I did not know it at the time," he would always say, looking at Katherine with such love that it made her eyes sting with happy tears. "But when I cleared that path and carried your mother to safety, I was not just saving her life. I was saving my own. She rescued me just as much as I rescued her." Connor, practical like his father, once asked, "But what if you had not been there, Papa? What if you had been hunting somewhere else that day?" Colt considered the question seriously, as he always did when his children asked him things. "I do not know, son. Perhaps someone else would have found your mother. Perhaps she would have freed herself somehow. Your mother is very strong and resourceful. But I am grateful every day that I was the one who heard her call for help, that I was given the chance to know her, to love her." The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and challenges. There were harsh winters when game was scarce, and they had to ration their supplies carefully. There was the year when fever swept through the region, and they barricaded themselves in the cabin, terrified that one of the children would fall ill. There was a fire in the barn that destroyed much of their stored hay, and a flash flood that nearly carried away Katherine's garden. But through it all, Colt and Katherine faced each challenge together, their love and partnership only growing stronger with time. They had learned to read each other without words, to anticipate each other's needs, to work in perfect tandem whether they were preparing food, tending animals, or managing their boisterous children. When Connor turned 18, tall and broad-shouldered like his father, he announced his intention to explore beyond their mountain home. It was bittersweet for both parents, pride mixed with worry and the ache of letting go. But they had raised their children to be independent and strong, and they would not hold him back now. Emma, at 16, had caught the eye of a young man from Shoshone City, a blacksmith's apprentice named James Mercer, who had proven himself worthy of Colt's approval through patience and genuine respect. The courtship was carefully supervised, but both Katherine and Colt could see that their daughter had found someone who would cherish her as she deserved. Henry, at 14, remained the bookish one, talking of maybe going east for proper schooling someday. The thought pained Katherine, but she understood it. She had gone west seeking adventure, and her youngest son dreamed of going east seeking knowledge. She would not deny him that any more than she would have wanted her own dreams denied. Through all the changes, the one constant was the love between Katherine and Colt. They had grown older together, their hair showing threads of silver now, their bodies marked by years of hard work. But when Colt looked at Katherine, he saw the same beautiful woman who had looked up at him from beneath that fallen tree with such hope in her green eyes. And when Katherine looked at Colt, she saw the same strong, steady man who had promised she would not die and had kept that promise in ways neither of them could have imagined. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Colt took Katherine's hand and led her away from the cabin, away from the children who were old enough now to manage on their own for an afternoon. He brought her to the place where he had first found her, where the fallen tree had once trapped her but now lay rotting back into the earth, almost completely gone. 20 years, he said, standing with her in that spot. 20 years since the best day of my life. It was not a particularly good day for me initially, Katherine teased. What with the broken leg and all, he laughed, pulling her close. Fair point, but you have to admit it turned out well in the end. Better than well, she agreed, resting her head against his chest, still fitting perfectly in his arms after all these years. It turned out perfect. They stood there for a long time, remembering, grateful, completely content. Around them, the forest sang with life. Birds called, wind rustled through the pines, and somewhere nearby a stream bubbled over rocks. It was the same wild place it had always been, but it was also their place, the place where their story had begun. As they walked back to the cabin, their hands intertwined, Katherine thought about everything that had led her to this moment. The dissatisfaction with her old life, the journey west, the storm that had spooked her horse, even the terrible moment when the tree had fallen. Each event had been necessary, had brought her exactly where she needed to be. She had come to the wilderness seeking adventure and found so much more. She had found love, purpose, family, and home. She had found herself, and Colt, walking beside her, felt the same gratitude. He had thought his life was over in any meaningful sense when he had retreated to these mountains. He had thought he was beyond redemption, beyond connection, beyond love. But Katherine had proven him wrong about everything. She had seen past his rough exterior to the man beneath. She had chosen him, had built a life with him, had given him children and laughter and light. They had saved each other, truly. Not just once on that day when the tree fell, but every day since then in 1,000 small ways. The sun was setting as they reached the cabin, painting the sky in brilliant shades of red and gold. Smoke curled from the chimney where Emma was cooking dinner, and they could hear Henry's voice reading aloud from inside, probably to Connor, who had not yet left on his planned journey. It was the sound of home, of family, of a life well lived. Colt paused at the porch steps, turning to look at Katherine in the golden light. Her hair, more silver than auburn now, caught the sun and seemed to glow. Her face was lined with age and weather and laughter, and he thought she had never been more beautiful. "I love you," he said, the same words he said to her every day but which never lost their meaning. "Thank you for staying, for building this life with me, for loving me even when I did not think I deserved it." Katherine reached up to cup his weathered face in her hands. "I love you too, and you did deserve it, Colt. You always did. You are the best man I have ever known, and I would not trade a single moment of our life together for anything." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and for a moment they were not parents or homesteaders or people entering their middle years. They were simply two souls who had found each other against all odds and chosen to build something beautiful together. Inside the cabin, their children waited with dinner and stories and the comfortable chaos of family life. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging, witnesses to their love story. And in that moment, standing on the porch of the home they had built together, Katherine and Colt were complete. The years that followed were full and rich. Connor did eventually leave to explore the wider world, but he returned often, eventually bringing home a wife of his own and settling on a nearby piece of land that Colt helped him claim. Emma married her blacksmith, and their home in Shoshone City became a regular destination for visits. Henry did go east to school, but he too returned, using his education to help the community and eventually becoming a teacher for the children of the growing region. Grandchildren arrived, filling the cabin with new laughter and joy. Colt built a bigger table to accommodate the growing family for Sunday dinners, and Katherine taught her daughters-in-law the same skills she had learned when she had first come to the mountains. The legacy they had built together continued to grow and flourish. Through it all, through every season and every change, Colt and Katherine remained the center, the foundation upon which everything else was built. Their love, forged in crisis and tempered by years of partnership, was unshakable. On quiet mornings, they still sat together watching the sunrise, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting on his chest. On difficult days, they drew strength from each other, never facing challenges alone. And on joyful days, which were many, they celebrated together, grateful for every moment they had been given. As they grew older still, their pace slowed, but their love remained constant. Colt's joints grew stiff from years of hard work, and Katherine's eyes weakened so that she needed spectacles for her sewing. But they adapted and continued, always together. One evening, well into their 70s, they sat on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. The mountains were purple in the fading light, and the air was sweet with the scent of pine and wildflowers. Their children were grown and established, their grandchildren thriving, and their great-grandchildren beginning to arrive. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Katherine asked, her hand finding his as naturally as breathing. "When you found me under that tree, I told you to hold on, that I was going to get you out," Colt said, his memory of that day still vivid despite the passage of time. "You also said you would not allow me to die," Katherine reminded him. "You sounded so absolutely certain." "I was certain. I am still certain." He turned to look at her, his dark eyes still holding that same fierce determination they had held decades ago. "I will always protect you, Katherine. For whatever years we have left, I will keep you safe." "I know you will," she said softly. "Just as I will keep you safe. We protect each other. That is what we have always done." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, thousands of brilliant points in the vast darkness. They had seen these same stars every night for decades, but they never lost their wonder. The wilderness that had seemed so vast and intimidating when Katherine had first arrived now felt like home, familiar and beloved. Their story, which had begun with a fallen tree and a desperate cry for help, had become something neither of them could have imagined. It was not just a tale of rescue, though it was certainly that. It was a story of two people who had found exactly what they needed in each other, who had built something lasting and beautiful from an unlikely beginning. The mountain man who had saved the trapped woman had found himself saved in return. The woman who had sought adventure had found something far more valuable in love and partnership and family. Together, they had created a legacy that would endure for generations, children and grandchildren who carried their strength, their values, and their capacity for deep, abiding love. As the night deepened and the temperature dropped, Colt helped Katherine to her feet and they went inside their cabin, the same cabin where they had first fallen in love, where their children had been born, where countless memories had been made. The fire was banked, casting a warm glow over the familiar space, and they prepared for bed with the ease of long practice. That night, as every night, they lay together in the bed that had been hers once and was now theirs, his arms around her, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. It was the most comforting sound in her world, that heartbeat, because it meant he was there, he was alive, they were together. "Good night, my love," Colt whispered into her hair. "Good night," Katherine whispered back, already drifting toward sleep, secure in his embrace. Outside, the mountains stood watch under the stars, eternal and unchanging. Inside, two people who had found each other in the wilderness slept peacefully, their love story complete and perfect, with nothing left unsaid and nothing left undone. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and built something that would last far beyond their own years. It was, in every sense, a happily ever after earned through courage, dedication, and the choice to love each other through all of life's challenges and joys. From the moment Colt had cleared the path and carried Katherine to safety, They had been building toward this ending, toward a life so full and rich that when they looked back on it, they could only feel gratitude. They had found each other in the wild Wyoming mountains in 1878, two unlikely souls brought together by chance and choice. And they had created something beautiful, something lasting, something perfect. Their love story, born from crisis and kindness, had become a testament to what two people could build when they committed fully to each other, and to the life they wanted to create. As the years continued to pass, Colt and Katherine remained the heart of their growing family, the example of what love could be when it was given freely and protected fiercely. And when their time finally came, many years later, they left behind not just children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, but a legacy of love that would continue to ripple outward through the generations. The cabin still stood in the mountains, expanded and improved over the years, but fundamentally the same. The forest still sang with life around it. And the story of the mountain man who found a woman trapped by fallen trees, who cleared the path and carried her to safety, and who found in that act of rescue his own salvation, was told and retold as a tale of true love found in the most unexpected of places. It was a story with a perfect ending, because it was a story of two people who chose each other every single day, who built a life of meaning and purpose together, and who proved that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with a cry for help and a determination to answer it, no matter the cost.